And good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Arkansas Basketball Radio Network. Oh, whoa, whoa,
No.
no, wait a minute.
No.
Wait a minute.
Oh boy.
Welcome back to Two Guys in a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. I just had to throw that in there.
You got your cheap shot in last week when I wasn't able to defend myself.
Well, so I'll repeat it.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
And so then after Arkansas taking down number one Auburn, then they lost to Alabama on Alabama's home court by 1 point, like in the last 2 seconds of the game. But then they promptly turn around and they beat Tennessee. So, woo!
Well, hey, any victory against Tennessee is a victory for us all, I believe.
For us all.
Yes.
Yeah. Why anyone would choose orange,
Ugh.
I'm not real sure. So anyway, I had to celebrate. And I will tell you this, that before we came on air, Daniel said, I've got to take a break and go to the other room, change that shirt.
He did.
Which was not going to happen.
No, yeah, I noticed. You're not very good at following instructions, which is why you gotten yourself into so much trouble over the years, I believe.
That is exactly right. No question about that. But, pardon me, good to have Daniel back. Last week, his son was sick. He was sick and with the flu. And so it's great to know they've gotten over that and they're back with us. And so we do appreciate that.
Oh yes, for sure. Well, it was terrible. I got the call to go home to go to the daycare to pick him up, and on the drive home, I was going, whatever's wrong with him might just be wrong with me.
Yeah.
And by the time we got settled in at the house, I was just not in the mood to do anything. And the next day, or the next day. And then we had all kinds of craziness happen towards the end of the week. Then I went to Gatlinburg for 4 days, and so I'm back.
Yeah. Well, the flu is an amazing thing, and it can just seem like fall out of the sky on you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You're okay 1 minute, next minute you're not. I'll never forget as a young man, I had been out playing football with all the neighborhood buddies. And boy, I was just feeling great. We had a wonderful time. And I walked into the house and I literally fell over in the floor and I was sick with the flu for the next week.
Yeah.
It just boomed just like that. I had never experienced anything quite like that. That just hit me so suddenly. It's not any fun. Not any fun at all.
Nope. And I've only ever gotten one flu shot in my entire life, like maybe 3 years ago. And when we were going to have our baby, Caden, the doctor said, you have to get a flu shot, not for yourself, for the baby. So he said, yeah, okay, don't usually do it. But when you do it, and then you get the flu anyways, you're going, I didn't have to get that stupid shot after all. But then when you get flu, but when you get the flu and you didn't have it, you're going, I think I might have liked that a little bit.
Well, the last 2 times I got the flu shot, I caught the flu.
Yeah.
And so I'm just at the point where, you know what? I'm just not real high on getting any kind of a shot. That's kind of where I'm at. I'm not taking the COVID shot, and I have been advised by 3 different nurses not to do so because of my really bad respiratory history.
Sure.
And the very first nurse, it was really kind of amusing. I was at the doctor for some reason. I don't remember why. But anyway, the nurse just rather flippant, said, oh, I guess you're all vaxxed up, right? And I said, no, I'm not. Oh, she was just aghast. She was, oh, Mr. Preston, why not? And I said, well, let me put it to you like this. I've had double pneumonia 13 times, and that's my actual count.
Yeah.
And I said, I've had severe respiratory infections more times than I can even begin to count that have knocked me completely on my back for a week to 10 days. And she was going, are you serious? I said, believe me, I am really, really serious about this.
Yeah.
And she said, well, then whatever you do not get that vaccine.
Right.
She said, you'd be committing suicide if you did that. I said, it's kind of my philosophy about it. So no, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And we had our doctor, they had suggested to us because of the professions that we're in, working with people, especially older people, me, on
Yeah.
my end, to go ahead and do that. So we just went ahead and got it, and I was sick a day and fine after that. But I know that Dallas, he got the first one because they suggested that he did, and he had a really bad allergic reaction, uh, itching and everything,
Oh,
for a long time. And his doctor said no. Um, you don't need to get the other one. Just be a little bit more careful, than other people. That's
yeah. Well,
with
yeah.
with since he couldn't get that. But that when I turned, however old it was, I think I guess I was 18, and I had to go get the prick on my arm to check
Yeah.
for what is that disease that they check for with the prick on your arm? You go back in a few days, and if it's raised or something.
The smallpox.
Oh, is that it? Okay,
I think that's
I
what it
couldn't
is.
remember.
Maybe I'm
Um,
wrong. Yeah.
anyways, I had to do that to get into college, and I remember, you know, accounting. Okay, I've had all my tetanus boosters now or whatever. I've had all the shots they give to you when you're a kid. This is my last one. This is the last one I'll ever get if I can help it. I was wrong, but
Yeah.
I hate needles. I hate shots, and now that my son's getting them, I just close my eyes and hold his arms and just look the other way. I don't want anything to do with it.
Well, I've had so many shots in my life because when I was a real young guy, and in fact, on up into when I very first got married, for the first 2 to 3 years after I got married, I spent 1 to 2 weeks in the hospital. And
Oh
of course,
wow,
my wife is going, "What have I married into here? What in the world's
yeah.
going on?"
She had no idea. This.
I had no idea. And so it's just like, okay, stick me, big deal, that type of thing. And I give blood about anywhere from 2 weeks to a month. And it's just, they go, oh, well, which arm do you prefer? Which finger do you prefer? And I said, whatever,
Yeah.
just and of course now I've got veins in my arm that stick up this big.
Hmm.
And the nurses, when I clench the little rubber ball, and they put the strap on it, they're going, oh my goodness. I said,
Yeah.
yeah, no problem taking blood from me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I just I don't like to put things in my body that I don't feel comfortable
Hmm.
about.
Right.
Obviously. And with the history that I have to be extra cautious anyway.
Sure.
So, like I said, I've had these three nurses tell me that for me to take that shot would be like committing suicide. That was the term that two of them used.
Hmm.
And I said, well, I agree with you, and I'm simply not going to take the shot. I'll be careful. I will use my hand alcohol very religiously, very faithfully, and I do. I've got I've got a jug of it over there behind me.
Yeah.
And I've got it in my truck. We've got it in the car. We've got it at the house. I mean, everywhere we go, we have alcohol with us. And that's not, I don't mean this. It's this. Yeah. So I think I had to make that clear for some people.
Right. Right. Right.
But
Well.
anyway, thank the good Lord, we have both been, very, very fortunate. We've been around people that have wound up having COVID and severe cases of it. But we're both really honestly, we're both convinced that we had it
Hmm.
about 3 years ago before they actually came out with the official pronouncement of what it was. Uh, I was going to go to Virginia Beach to speak at David Curtis's seminar. On the plane ride out there, Jan got just deathly ill. She spent the whole time in the hotel room, just running very, very high fever, throwing up, diarrhea, just a whole ball of wax. Just, oh, bless her heart, she was sick. I managed to just go right straight through, didn't have any problems. I spoke my desert, pardon me, my appointed times. On the way back, I got sick with the same stuff. And for 2 weeks, She would be in a bedroom. I was on the couch. Both of us basically curled up in the fetal position, saying,
Wow.
"Make the world go away. Just
Oh yeah.
make it go away." And we, of course, would have our phones, would text back and forth. "You still alive in there?" uh, but we went to the doctor, and the doctor that Jan knew through her hospital work, she said, "Well, I've got to tell you, it's a virus of some kind, but I don't know what it is because I've never seen this before." And so we're going, in retrospect, we're going, okay, we know what that was now.
Hmm.
So now, did we ever get an official, diagnosis as COVID? No, we didn't. But we had every single one of the symptoms that people report when they get COVID.
Yeah, that's one of the tough things whenever a virus is going around, like what we had last week. You don't know, is this COVID? Is this the flu? Is it just some daycare bug that the kids picked up or something? It's hard to
Yeah.
tell. It's scary. But here we are. We're
Here
alive,
we are.
and so we still
as,
yeah,
I
we
tell
still have a
people,
cough, but
well, I'm still having trouble.
yeah.
I made a mistake a while ago. I went to Subway to get myself something to eat. I worked right straight through lunch, and I gave in and got myself a great big root beer, which of
Oh,
course has caffeine in it, and so the caffeine went right straight to my vocal cords,
there you go.
and
Yeah,
I'm having trouble with that. But we'll do
yeah.
the
I
best that we can.
opted for a Sprite this time around.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, well, folks, we're glad to be back with you. Neither one of us have COVID, thank the good Lord. And so here we are. Want to continue our discussion of the Messianic Temple. Now, I want to tell you, and by the way, I wanted to recommend a book. Um, it is by a Catholic scholar. Her name is Mary Colo, or Colo, however you wish to pronounce that. There's a good bit of her Catholic theology in this. So, as just a full word of warning, pardon me, uh, you will understand why she says some of the things that she does. But this book, entitled "God Dwells with Us: Temple Symbolism in the Gospel of John," and she has some very, very insightful comments in this book. It is wonderful in many ways, but like I said, just like reading any book, you got to pick out the bones, and that probably includes my books. So just
Yeah.
just kind of a heads up. But I tell you, she does such a her comments on John chapter 14, which is, we will wind up there without any doubt. Her comments and her development, her exegesis of John chapter 14 is just wonderful. And for those who believe that John chapter 14 is about Christ coming to take the church off of the earth, and that includes those who believe in an AD 70 rapture, which I categorically reject, or those who take the position of a sudden, mysterious, invisible rapture of the church in our near future, which I categorically reject as well. So, regardless of which one of those positions a person takes, her comments and her exegesis of John chapter 14, of what Christ was promising to establish the Messianic kingdom among men on earth, it's worth the price of the book. I have to tell you that. It's really, really outstanding. And, I had been familiar with, of course, through other studies, I had been familiar with the Feast of Hanukkah, how it developed, why the Jews did it, a lot of the imagery behind it. And of course, I mean, you sort of kind of have to investigate that a little bit when you come to John chapter 10. Because in John chapter 10, verse 22, it says, "Now, it was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter. Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. And so here we have a biblical book about a feast day that Jesus observed. And as a faithful Jew, he would have observed this, every time that he is in Jerusalem to celebrate tabernacles. The Feast of Hanukkah was established during, or I should say, following the period of Antiochus Epiphanes. And the period of Antiochus Epiphanes from about 174 to 164, somewhere along in there, BC. Antiochus Epiphanes decided that in the first place, he wanted to conquer the world. He wanted to follow in the footsteps of Alexander the Great. That was his lineage. And so one of the things that he really, really believed firmly in was Hellenization, because he believed that Alexander the Great's efforts to bring the Greek culture, Greek philosophy, Greek religion, Grecian worldview into the known world was the greatest thing that he could ever do. And it's one of the reasons why he was such a warrior king. He went to war to conquer countries to force them to become Greek. He had a profound influence on Israel, because while other countries sometimes just capitulated and said, oh, so we got a choice of you coming in, rampaging, ravaging, destroying our country, or adopting Grecian ways. That's our choice. And they go, yeah, pretty much it. And they go, oh, we're Greeks. Come on in. So, of course, for the Hebrews, that was not something they would ever entertain, because the Hebrews believed in one God. The Greeks believed in many gods. They had Zeus, which was their top dog god. And as Antiochus Epiphanes sent his generals throughout the country of Israel to subdue them and to spread Grecian culture, he went to a place called Modin, and there they set up an altar, and they found a period of time in which the local Hebrews were about to offer sacrifice to Yahweh. They couldn't go to Jerusalem, so they're offering some sacrifices there locally. And the Syrian general intervened and said, no, we're going to offer a pig. We're going to offer a sacrifice to Zeus. And you're either going to offer obeisance, all of you Jews gathered around here, or we're just going to kill the lot of you. Well, one of the Jewish priests that was present stepped forward and said, oh, cool, I'll kill it. and I'll put it up on the altar. And Mattathias, an elderly Jew, stepped forward and promptly killed that Jewish priest. And he said, no, we're not bowing to Zeus. We're not bowing to the Syrians. We have one God, and him we will worship. And so they promptly killed a bunch of the Syrian soldiers, ran the general of Antiochus Epiphanes completely out of the country. And so started what was known as the Maccabean Wars. And I've got to tell you, Daniel, when I was a young man, I might have heard of that once or twice, but I was so thoroughly ignorant of all of that. I didn't have a clue what it was all about. It wasn't until much later that I kept reading references in the scholarly literature to first Maccabees, second Maccabees, third Maccabees, fourth Maccabees. Okay, what in the world is all this stuff? And I began reading some of it. And some of it you're going, no, that's not true. But because it's kind of phantasmagoric, but nonetheless, it's really fascinating stuff to give us insight into what we call today the intertestamental period of time.
Yeah, I actually purchased a Bible, the New Oxford Annotated Bible, the big red one.
Indeed,
it's back there on the shelf, so I could have I could have better access to the apocryphal works and things like that. because they are invaluable. It's like when you're studying the question that the Sadducees ask about seven brothers. You
Yeah.
know, well, there's a story right there. Well, Second Maccabees 7, I think, where there's seven
Yeah, it's
brothers who are
seven brothers.
yeah, the seven brothers who are who would rather taste death, and have a better resurrection than what Antiochus Epiphanes was offering and allowing them to keep their life. So there's stuff like that you pick up on that you're going, huh? Maybe that's where they got seven brothers from. Well,
Yeah.
you never know that you wouldn't get otherwise. And we were so, you know, we were just so forced to only look at the 66 inspired books of the Bible. No outside literature. Apocrypha, that's Catholic stuff. We don't need
That's
anything
right.
like
That's
that.
right.
And no outside writings whatsoever. But you need that stuff, especially if you want to understand the book of Daniel and all the historical references there. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
Well, an awful lot of the times, I know I was raised in an environment. It's absolutely anathema to do anything not specifically mentioned in the Bible.
Oh,
If
yes, yes.
it's not in there, well, guess what? The Feast of Hanukkah was not in Torah. And yet here the Jews were observing it, had been observing it, not quite for 200 years,
Right.
but they had been observing it for a good long while. And here is Jesus going to Jerusalem to observe it.
Yep.
I mean, he was there. He was part and parcel of it. So anyway, what prompted that Maccabean Wars was the situation with Maccabeus, or with Antiochus's general and the entire Hellenization. Well, Mattathias was an old man, but his sons took over. Yeah, Judas Maccabeus. I used to be able to name all seven of them, and I can't do that anymore. But nonetheless, go ahead and name them.
Oh, yeah. Hold on, I have to go get some water.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Yeah, but anyway, Judas Maccabeus he was, for all practical purposes' sake, he was a military genius. Nobody knew that. But Judas Maccabeus began to organize the people in the countryside. Now, when his father did what he did by killing the Syrian general and the priest and what have you, a lot of the other people who didn't like the Hellenization but were not going to take a stand, they were going, we found a leader.
Yeah.
And so they fled into the Judean wilderness, and people just started flocking to them. I mean, they literally had no intention originally of raising an army and raising a rebellion and trying to free the country.
Sure.
But the people were so zealous of the law, so sick and tired of the efforts of Antiochus Epiphanes to rid the land of Torah and circumcision and what have you, that it was like, you know what? If it's a choice between apostatizing against Torah and dying, I'm going to take my stand. And it was rather remarkable. I mean, truly a remarkable period of time. They were extremely dangerous times. So Antiochus Epiphanes finally passed an edict. He didn't do it right at the very first, but he did very quickly, outlawing circumcision. And he issued this edict that any woman found circumcising her male child, she would be killed and the child would be killed. Now that's pretty radical. Let's face it. It's difficult for us today to get our heads wrapped around such brutality, such corruption, such unmerciful thinking. I mean, you're going to kill a baby because their mama circumcised him? Yeah, that's what Antiochus, commanded. And so they began doing that. And by the way, this woman with 7 sons, that was not Judas Maccabeus' wife, by the way. So this woman, knowing what the law was, if I remember this episode correctly, I'd have to go back and confirm, but I'm almost sure it's true. This woman stood up in the face of that edict and said, I would rather die and my sons die with me by refusing to be circumcised. Here I am. Because she said, I believe that in the life to come, they will be raised. So here is a woman said, hey, look, I got sick. Can you imagine a mother saying, I'm going to have my children circumcised, and if you kill me and every one of them, so be it, because we know that we have something better. So incredible faith was being demonstrated by the Jews. Now, after a period of war, pardon me, in which Judas Maccabeus was killed, some of his brothers were killed. His other brothers were not quite up to the task, but one of them was by the name of John Hykrainus. He managed to defeat the Syrians, to recapture Israel, to purge the temple, and to purge the altar. And John Hykrainus was an incredibly charismatic figure, a very, very powerful military leader. One of the things that he did, this is a little bit of a digression, but one of the things that he did, the vessels of the temple had been carried off at one time at the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Well, many of them had evidently been hidden. Well, guess what? John Hykrainus found those vessels, but they consecrated the vessels. But guess what? They didn't have the Ark of the Covenant. I got to tell you, this whole issue of the Ark of the Covenant is one. Every time I'm going through Discovery Channel, History Channel, where is the Ark of the Covenant? Is it in Ethiopia? Is it in Egypt? Or is it going? These people have never read Jeremiah 3. Jeremiah 3:15 and 16, the Lord making a prediction of the restoration of Israel. It's prophecy. And he says, in those days when the children of Israel, now this is telling me my internet connection is unstable. There it went, came back on. Anyway, it predicted a time in which both houses of Israel would be reunited. Well, guess what? That's messianic. And says they will no longer go up to Jerusalem, and they will no longer say the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, for it shall no longer be remembered, nor will it be built again. And the first time I ran onto that, I'm going, okay, there's something here. This is really, really good stuff. And do you remember the internet page, I guess, PalTalk? Were you ever on that?
I wasn't on that.
Okay, well, I used to be on that quite often. And one night, somebody tagged me and said, Don, you got to come over here. We got some premillennialists, and we got some Jews, and boy, they're talking about the temple, they're talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And I go, cool, here we go. So when I logged in, and in order to speak, you had a little icon that lets you raise your hand. Well, there was a Jewish rabbi, an actual Jewish rabbi, talking about the soon coming third temple, the soon coming restoration of the Ark of the Covenant. It really wasn't so much the restoration as it was they're going to find it anytime. He was one of those that believed that the Ark of the Covenant is under the Temple Mount right to this day. Okay. So anyway, he went on, and I raised my hand. I just had to talk. And I said, well, as to the restoration of the Ark of the Covenant, I just quoted the passage. I didn't read it. I just quoted it. And this Jewish rabbi went totally ballistic. He said, you are misquoting that. It does not say that. That is nowhere in the Bible. And I said, well, with all due respect, let me turn over there and read it. And I mean, I've done a comparative study of every English translation I can find. There's not any variation whatsoever. Pardon me. Some may translate it ever so slightly differently, but it all comes out the same. Neither shall it be built again. And he went completely totally silent. And I'm going, are you there? Are you there? Knock, 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 knock. And he came back on and he said, I just remembered an appointment that I've got. I've got to leave. I go, well, okay. Well, just about 3 minutes, lo and behold, here comes another rabbi. And he was somewhat arrogant. And he goes, I understand there's someone here who says that the Ark of the Covenant will never be built, never be restored. And I'm like, that'd be me. He did the same thing. He just blasted me. You're a Gentile. You do not know the scriptures. Pardon me. And I said, well, here's the deal. I've got my Bible in front of me. And I said, unless every English translation ever known to man has got it wrong, unless you can prove that in the Masoretic text, it doesn't say this, then here's what it says. So I read it again. And, on the side at the time, they used to have, the thumbs up signals and this kind of from people monitoring. And I'm telling you, it was just lit up over here. I mean, it was just, pardon me, it was funny to sit and watch it. So I read it again. And the second Jewish rabbi said, I just remembered I have an appointment. I can't stay. I've got to go. Okay. Bye. It says what it says. So if Jeremiah said right here on the eve of the destruction of Jerusalem, when it's generally, broadly, almost universally believed that the Ark of the Covenant, one of two things, was captured by the Babylonians and destroyed, or in fact, it might have been hid away somewhere and completely lost. I don't believe the latter. I don't believe the Ark of the Covenant was hidden away. Not to say they wouldn't have liked to have done that. But the point of fact is, when Jeremiah says the Ark of the Covenant will never be built again, that's pretty definitive. So when we are talking, ladies and gentlemen, when we are talking about the temple and the Messianic temple, and when your preacher, when your pastor, educated Dallas Theological Seminary, Southwest Theological Seminary, New Orleans Seminary. Whoops, sorry.
Freudian slip there.
Freudian slip. So when your preacher stands up and says, one of these days, very soon, they are going to discover the Ark. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but several years ago, a self-professed, self-trained guy, and he was absolutely fascinating in many ways. He made some legitimate archaeological discoveries, but his name is Ron Wyatt. Do you remember the name? You know the name?
I'm not sure.
Well, like I said, he was a self-trained archaeologist. He did not have a lot of formal training as an archaeologist, but he was very, very zealous. He was a Bible believer without any doubt, but he unfortunately had a tendency to invent some archaeological discoveries. He made an announcement to the world. He had found the Ark of the Covenant under the Temple Mount. Now, mind you, he's not supposed to be under the Temple Mount. That's strictly off limits. So his story was they had found a previously unknown tunnel, and they went through this tunnel. They broke through this barricade, and there's the Ark of the Covenant. And he took pictures and announced them to the world, showed the pictures to the world. Well, as some sharp-eyed sleuths pointed out, we didn't realize they had pop rivets in the days of Moses. Pop rivets here, pop rivets here, pop rivets here. So, guess what? This is not the Ark of the Covenant. Well, Ron Wyatt wouldn't back off. So he said on such and such date, it was going to be a June something or other, if I remember correctly. So he goes, I am going to, with the assistance, with the aid, and in cooperation with some Jewish rabbis, well known, well recognized Jewish rabbis, we're going to announce this to the world. We're going to prove everything that I've said. Well, the date came and went, and Ron Wyatt disappeared. I mean, just completely, totally disappeared for a while. And he died not too terribly long after that. He said, well, as it turned out, when they finally managed to interview him, as it turns out, the Jewish rabbis said the time was not really right to reveal the Ark of the Covenant. So we're waiting for just the right time. Now, of course, you got to keep in mind that for generations now, Jewish rabbis have been saying, the time is right. The time is here. It's time for Messiah to come. So the song that said, we're waiting for just the right time, sung by Ron Wyatt, just didn't really fly. Now, again, I'm saying all of that, ladies and gentlemen, to bring us back to this situation here in John chapter 10, the Feast of Hanukkah, because this was a time of incredible messianic expectation. So let's go back to the time of John Hykrainus. John Hykrainus restored for a brief period of time the temple vessels. But then, as it became pretty obvious that the Syrians were going to retake Jerusalem, John Hykrainus said, we're going to hide these vessels again. They will remain hidden until a true prophet arises, who will anoint them, who will purify them, and put them to their proper use. Now, this is all incredibly fascinating because, and this segues perfectly into John 10, there were many in the days of John Hykrainus who believed that he might possibly be Messiah. What did he do? He purified the temple. He purged the altar. He offered sacrifices once again. Now, John Hykrainus was of the priestly family, but there's a problem here. According to my good friend in Israel, Reuven Bronner is his name. I've mentioned him. He is a genuine Hebrew scholar. And I just recently asked him, for instance, what were the scripture readings? What were the hoftora readings for the Feast of Sukkot? Now, hoftora, as he just explained to me ever so briefly, hof means after. So after Torah, they had regular scripture readings on every single day of Sukkot, but they had the hoftora, which were very special, very specially designated scripture readings that were to take place after the reading of Torah. And those two passages, and keep this in mind as we reflect back on John chapter 6, 7, and 8. On the very first day of Sukkot, they read Zechariah 14. In the middle of Sukkot, they read Ezekiel 38. And I have made this comment to many different individuals as I shared these things. It strikes me as incredibly significant, incredibly suggestive, if nothing else, that on the first day of Sukkot and in the middle of Sukkot, the two key prophecies that they read both predicted destruction of Jerusalem and Israel, leading to the new creation. Did they not catch that? I mean, isn't that, Daniel, how does that strike you? Should a Jew of the time not have gone, wait a minute, there's something bad going on here?
Yeah, I think you catch glimpses of that, with especially the Pharisees conference in John 11, if this man continues and he's going to come take away, they're going to come take away our place in our nation. All the Jewish leaders got together and they recognized something was going to happen if Jesus continued and his followers continued. And funnily enough, they were exactly right. Their suspicions were correct. They just thought that they could stop it by putting Jesus to death. And when that didn't work, it's almost like they offered up Stephen as a burnt offering as well. Let's do what we can to show them that we're on their side, but nothing could stop it was coming. But nothing could stop it from coming. And it's interesting that when you asked that question, I thought of, I can't believe, I always get the kings at the end of the end of the book of Acts confused, but I think it was Felix. He was the one that was more knowledgeable of the law. His wife was Jewish, and he understood better than most, of the things that were coming upon the whole world, and he began to tremble when Paul began to talk to him about judgment and righteousness and the things to come. He knew exactly what was going to happen. So I'd say that's probably one of the reasons why they were so against the gospel message, is because they knew what it meant in a way. They probably had more insight, than we maybe even realize. And that might have been maybe even a subconscious thing. If this can't be the Messiah, if this is the Messiah, our fun is over,
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm not sure. And there was a statement that they make in Acts 17 that they're turning the whole world, on its head, turning the whole world upside down. And so I think that there was a pretty good idea of what was going to happen. They just hoped that when the Messiah come, he would be more on their side and not going around talking bad about them, and condemning what they were doing over and over again, and saying that they were following the traditions of men and things like that. So I think in a way they saw the train coming. But for people today who want the end to come so bad, it's almost they don't. I don't think that they understand like what you're getting at. I don't think that they have any clue of what they're really hoping for. And some of them do. You mentioned the one guy who's, I hope I get to see it,
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of Christians, I don't know if they really realize what they're being fed. If what those pastors and preachers are saying is true, of course. But I think of especially Anna from Luke and Zacharias and some of the others who were looking for the redemption and the consolation of Israel. They probably had a pretty good idea of what was going on, I would think. Because they do talk about the rise and the fall of many in Israel. The not just the rise, but the anastasis, the resurrection and the fall. So the resurrection and the condemnation of many in Israel. So they probably had a pretty good idea, but I wouldn't want to be a part of it. That's for sure.
Well, we have made comment on this program before, and we cannot overemphasize this fact. In fact, I could not help but laugh this morning. I wasn't laughing at someone. I was laughing at the whole concept of how tragic it is that so few people have actually tapped into this. But this one guy had posted on several Facebook pages, some of the smaller ones, but nonetheless, he was so excited. And the heading of his post was the importance of audience relevance. This guy had just discovered the significance of audience relevance. And he was just posting, like I said, 3 or 4 different Facebook pages, like, look what I've just discovered. And we're going, good, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, his writing style was very exuberant. You could tell he was genuinely excited, and he wrote some really good things. Pardon me, but this is one of the reasons why I really enjoy N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is so very, very good, as well as Richard Hayes and Scott McKnight, some of those other scholars of the same stripe. They are so good at bringing out the audience relevance of the historical world in which Jesus walked and talked and lived and struggled. And so the more that we understand that, the better equipped we are to understand what Jesus was really saying. And I will never forget, it's been about 3 years ago now. I was on one Facebook exchange, and there was a member of the Churches of Christ on there. I won't name his name. but I was quoting some scholarship. Now, mind you, I was quoting Greek scholars, Hebrew scholars. I was quoting from men such as N.T. Wright. And anybody that would challenge their academic credentials, now that doesn't mean you have to agree with their theological and even philosophical interpretations. But when you're talking about their expertise in linguistics, when you're talking about their expertise in actual history, and that's what I was appealing to, their knowledge of linguistics and history, culture, etc. And this guy ripped into me and he said, that's precisely what is wrong with you, Preston. You think too much of scholarship. And I was like, well, maybe I plead guilty to that. What do you mean by that? And he said, I don't need one single book more than the Bible. And I was literally flabbergasted. Now, mind you, in my teenage years, I might have said that. But the more I read and the more I study, and John chapter 10, 22 and following is a prime example of it. What would we know, Daniel, what would we know about the Feast of Hanukkah without some outside sources?
Well, first, you wouldn't even know this was talking about the Feast of Hanukkah. Because you would have said Feast of Dedication. Feast of Hanukkah is not in my Bible, Don K.
That's
Preston.
right.
It says Feast of Dedication.
Right. That's exactly right. So see, Preston, you're all messed up. Yeah.
But, I would have said the same thing, Don, except I would have said, I don't need anything except for a Bible and a Strong's Concordance and a Thayer's Greek-English lexicon.
Well, I came back with this fella and I said, why are you opposed to scholarship?
Yeah.
And he said, because it's not necessary. All I need is the Bible. So I asked him, I said, well, who produced the Bible? I said, are you not aware that it was Greek scholarship that produced the Bible? Are you not aware that it was men who are scholars who produced the lexicons upon which the translators relied to produce the Bible? And are you not aware that it was historians who went back into the culture, the time, everything of the ancient times to discover what the words meant at the time the book was written? I said, are you unaware of the incredible, vast background of scholarly knowledge that was necessary to produce the Bible that's in your hands? He promptly disappeared. Promptly disappeared from the conversation.
But you're exactly right. And if you take into all that account, you're looking at archaeologists to find the different scraps of paper. You're looking at anthropologists who can study the culture and everything, and the development of the religions and things in the area to be able to compare maybe how these words are used in a religious context over here, and how it relates to the Hebrew and all these kinds of things, and all the lexicographers and everyone. You take all of that, and then you can just move that to other subjects. Well, you're going to study about the Feast of Dedication. Look to archaeologists. How are they doing that in the first century? Anthropology. And you could look at linguistics. What sort of language did they use? What did they quote? What did they say? What passages did they read? The same scholars that you depend on to get your Bible in your English are the same scholars you can depend on, just as dependable, to give you the historical background to the New Testament. So, I don't see why anyone would shy away from that whatsoever. That's beyond me.
Well, like I said, in my naivety of my youth a long time ago, I actually would have ascribed to that because I heard one preacher after another say, folks, all we need is the Bible. Well, if you're talking about the final authority in doctrinal matters, hey, I'm with you on that, right? Gotcha. Right. But if you're talking about every single aspect of exactly like you're talking about, anthropology, history, even paleography, one of the things that's been fascinating to me for so long, and I know extremely little about it, but nonetheless it's fascinating, is that at different periods of time, they had a form of writing. The actual shape of the letters was different than it would have been 200 years later. Therefore, if they find a manuscript in the Hebrew or in the Greek, and it's got this kind of writing that has this style,
almost like a different font.
it is. That's a good way to express it. It's got this font in at this period of time versus this. Then they can date this manuscript at a given point of time and say, oh, well, okay, this is a second century manuscript because we have 2,200 manuscripts with that type of font. Oh, but wait, now we've got a manuscript over here that dates back to 200 BC. And so all of these things go into it. And I had no clue. I literally had no clue about any of that background, how important it is.
Oh, even the typos. You learn just as much from the typos as you do the correct, because you can figure out when did they pronounce Omicron with a long O or a short O, and they knew that by looking at typos that were on, laundry lists and and soldiers' notes and things like that. And so it's just fascinating when you get into all that study of how much work they put into it. And so just to say, I don't need scholarship, I just need the Bible, is to be totally ignorant of the history of translation and translation philosophy, and we didn't even get into translation philosophy, word for word, literal, paraphrase, whatever. It's just a very ignorant and sad comment to make. And, a lot of our ministers within the churches of Christ would know better than to say something like that, but you can see the impact that those who didn't have had on many of our brethren. So,
well, that's exactly right. So, all of that said, now again, back to Hykrainus. As I said, I think it's fascinating that John Hykrainus was looking forward to a time in which, as he says it, when a true prophet shall arise, and these vessels can be consecrated appropriately. Now, a couple of things pop out to us that are totally relevant, totally relevant to a study of the Messianic temple and the Feast of Dedication here in John chapter 10, verse 22 and following. Number one, even though John Hykrainus was of the priestly lineage, and even though he offered sacrifice on the altar after purifying it, my friend in Israel that I started to tell that story and somehow or other got sidetracked. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, he has shared with me on numerous occasions how in Jewish law, it was absolutely forbidden that any man who was a man of violence, who had ever fought in war, who had ever shed human blood, they were automatically disqualified from serving as a priest. Well, that automatically raises the question, okay, then here's John Hykrainus, who is one of the incredibly great warriors of Israel, who shed the blood of a whole bunch of people by his own sword. He's offering sacrifice on the altar. Is that acceptable sacrifice? Not according to Jewish law. It was a part of a period of time. And again, this reflects directly on Jesus in the temple in John chapter 10. It was a period of time that began with Onias III under Antiochus Epiphanes from 174 to 168 or somewhere therein. I always forget the exact dates. Onias III was the last known, fully certified, fully qualified, honorable, and holy high priest. He was the very last one of the Levitical Aaronic priesthood to be fully qualified to offer the atonement. And by the way, tomorrow or Wednesday, I'll be publishing an article on my website, and it's a short shot, what I call a short shot, because it's only about 3 pages long. But it is Antiochus, Onias, Jacob, and the atonement. And the reason I wrote this article is because Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24 says 70 weeks are determined to make the atonement. Well, guess what? The liberal, higher critical scholars say Daniel chapter 9 is absolutely not a messianic prophecy. Daniel chapter 9 is about the period of Antiochus Epiphanes. Onias III was the Messiah, the anointed one, who was cut off in the middle of the week, but not for himself, verse 26. And that's when the atonement was made. And I'm going, there's something wrong here. Onias was, once again, Onias was the very last fully qualified, fully certified, holy and pure. He was esteemed an extremely pious man, very holy, knowledgeable in Torah. Well, Philostratus, the king, was convinced by one of the temple authorities to pillage the temple riches for his own personal gain. So he tried it. Onias withstood him. I mean, Onias was an extremely brave man. Not only was he pious, he was brave, because here's the king, for crying out loud, and he withstood him. And then Philostratus was disposed of by Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes always needed money because he's always at war. Well, Onias had a brother by the name of Jason. Jason was a moral pervert. He was dishonest, extremely cruel, and unjust. And as I pointed out on last week's program while you were sick, Jason went to Antiochus and said, tell you what, I want to be high priest. You let me be high priest. You get rid of Onias. Here's all this gold and silver I'll give you. And Antiochus Epiphanes said, oh, well, cool deal. You are now high priest. So he disposed of Onias, who fled for his life, by the way, to a city by the name of Daphne that was over near Antioch. And so Jason is now the high priest. Now, mind you, he's robbing everybody that comes to the temple. He's getting filthy, stinking rich. And then a man by the name of Menolos, who some sources say, in fact, I think I said this last week, but on further research, I'm not so sure about it. But some sources say that Menolos was actually Jason's brother, who would have made him, obviously, Onias's brother. Well, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, however, Menolos was actually a Benjamite. He was not of the Levitical tribe. So I'm not real sure at this point exactly what that relationship was, but here's what we do know. Menolos realized what Jason had done. He bribed Antiochus. Well, Menolos was wealthier than Jason. So he goes to Antiochus and says, excuse me, Jason gave you X amount of gold and silver and money to have the high priestly office. Tell you what, I'll double it. Here you go. And Antiochus is going, oh, cool deal. You're the high priest, dude. So he got rid of Jason. Well, Onias is still down here at Daphne in seclusion, in hiding. So Jason and Menolos, knowing that he posed a threat to both of them as a high priest, they went down there and deceived him into coming out of sanctuary, and they killed him. Now, I give that background to say this. Jason and Menolos were violent murderers. They were bribers. They were extortioners. There was not hardly one thing good that you could say about either one of the men. So the question therefore becomes, for those who take the Antiochus Epiphanes dating and application of Daniel 9, how could either one of those men make the atonement? They couldn't. They're disqualified. Now, we're out of time, folks. Next week, we're going to dig deeper and tie in all of this stuff that we've shared with you this evening with John chapter 10, 22 and following, and the Feast of Hanukkah or dedication. Thanks for joining us. Great to be with you, Daniel. And with that, I'm going to say good night. God bless.